Let me read to you a passage from the 8th chapter of St. Mark's Gospel, verses 1 to 10. It's the Gospel for Saturday of the 5th week in Ordinary Time, Year 1. St. Mark writes, "During those days another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, 'I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way, because some of them have come a long distance.' His disciples answered, 'But where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them?' 'How many loaves do you have?' Jesus asked. 7, they replied. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. When he had taken the 7 loaves and given the thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also and told his disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterwards, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 men were present. And having sent them away, he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha." That's from Mark chapter 8, verses 1 to 10. And what does it suggest to us? Well, there is a well-known key to the knowledge of people. Get up close, and if possible, live with them. From afar, a person may seem admirable, while close up, he may well show up as being very different. Alexander the Great shot like a great meteor across his era, and in his short life, nothing seemed able to thwart him. He was great in his rapid conquests, but of course, he was full of flaws. He was a bloodthirsty adventurer, with no regard for human life if it stood in his way. He was proud, he was vain, and possibly, many historians think, an active homosexual. The single reference to him in the Old Testament was anything but laudatory. The glory of Alexander was hollow, and there are very many of whom this could be said. But get up close to Jesus Christ, and it is altogether different. In our gospel passage today that I read, our Lord does something which, as far as I'm aware of, no one else in the history of the world is reputed to have done. He took a handful of bread and a little fish, and having given thanks, simply gave it to his disciples and told them to distribute it to a crowd of thousands of hungry people, 4,000 people. The entire throng ate and was satisfied. Presumably their satisfaction refers not only to the seemingly unending quantity of food, but also to its taste and quality. Though simple, it was a sumptuous and delicious meal. Moreover, plenty of food was left over, implying that the crowd simply had no desire to eat any more. They had been given much more than they needed, and a lot of food was left. 7 basketfuls of broken pieces was gathered up. We remember the wedding feast of Cana. Well into the wedding celebrations, the wine ran out, and our Lord, at the prompting of his mother, simply directed the stewards to fill up the large jars with water. The water was turned into magnificent wine. Presumably, there was more than was needed, with some being left over. St. John writes that at that wedding feast of Cana, our Lord let his glory be seen, and his disciples believed in him. The disciples were up close to our Lord, and they saw his glory. In the Acts of the Apostles, our Lord's mighty works are often referred to. Our Lord himself invited his own disciples at one point to believe in him on the basis of his works if they needed to. No one in the history of the world can be likened to Christ in his miraculous actions, all at the service not of himself and his own glory, but at the service of those in need. Alexander the Great and all his like were nothing compared to the grandeur of Christ and the power of his word. He raised the dead at a word. He drove out evil spirits at a word. He healed all kinds of disease and sickness at a word. He calmed the storm at sea at a word. He came to his disciples across the Sea of Galilee and bade Simon Peter to come to him across the water, which he did till he failed in faith. The power of the man Jesus over nature and the underworld had no limit. Strangely, many did not accept him. Let us listen to the testimony of John the Evangelist, writing at the beginning of his gospel and long after the events he narrates. John exults that he had seen and known Jesus of Nazareth. Throughout the Gospels, he refers to himself as the beloved disciple. He had been beloved of Christ, and so had been truly close up. All he could say was, "We saw his glory." Christ truly had glory. John writes that the Word was made flesh and lived among us. We saw his glory, the glory that is his as the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. In John chapter 1 verse 14. Christ's glory included his unmatched power over nature and the world, but it especially included the grace and truth that filled his person and that comes from him to the world. The grace of God can be accessed, and it is accessed only in Jesus Christ. He is the one who has brought the grace and the truth of God to the world. It resides in him in its fullness, and it flows from him, present as he is in his body, the church, to the world. As we think of Christ effortlessly feeding 4,000 people with a mere handful of food, let us think of the glory of Jesus Christ. With him present in our midst, and through his body, the church, he remains constantly with us. We have all the anchor we need. Let us remain with him each day, coming to know his glory more and more, the glory that is his as the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth.